Darkcast Network, indie pods with a dark side. And welcome to Fuck That. Really quickly, before I jump into this week's episode, I just wanted to say thank you. Again, I've been saying this a lot lately, but my subscriber count has been going up a lot lately, and I really appreciate it. If you do subscribe and you like my content, please do me a favor. Give me a rating on Apple or on Spotify, wherever you listen. It really helps me out a lot. And if you don't follow me on TikTok at fthatpod or on Instagram at fthat_pod, I'm trying to make more shorts and reels related to the episode. So stay tuned for that and check out my social media pages there if you haven't yet. And lastly, I have been working really hard on building my Patreon. It's at fthatpod. All of my archived episodes are on there. I release the episodes a little bit earlier on Patreon, as well as bonus content. There is live Q&As, case discussions, and I am working on building up a massive Discord channel that is exclusive to my Patreon subscribers. So feel free to check that out as well at fthatpod. All right, now I'm going to jump into the episode. This week, I'm covering what is typically known as the Setagaya family murders. Now, the family that is at the center of this case is actually the Miyazawa family. However, they live in Setagaya, which is essentially a suburb of Tokyo. On a frosty winter night within the confines of their Setagaya residence, the Miyazawa family, with the parents Mikio and Yasuko, along with their children Nina, who's 8, and Rei, who is 6, began to engage in preparations for the upcoming celebrations. It was the night of December 30th, 2000, and amid the crisp winter air that swept across Setagaya, a serene neighborhood nestled within the bustling city, there was a sense of anticipation for the upcoming festivities and the renewal that would come with the new year. Setagaya, a suburban residential community located just outside of central Tokyo, was known for its upscale residential areas, museums, parks, as well as several other amenities that, quite frankly, I don't have in my neighborhood, so I just have a lot of potholes. But Setagaya does end up sucking in a little bit, so I guess I'd just rather keep my potholes. Anyway, at the time, it was a really great place to live, and in 1990, the happy family of 4 purchased a home in the Kamiso Shigaya neighborhood. I have really been challenging myself lately with these episodes and pronunciations from other parts of the world. I have probably spent at least a half hour listening to pronunciations off of different websites I found on Google for this case, so hopefully I am hitting the nail on the head as well as somebody from the United States can. Mikio, the 44-year-old father of the family, worked in corporate identity development for Interbrand, which, according to the company website, is, quote, the world's leading brand consultancy for over 40 years. Mikio worked remotely from his private ground floor office, and Yasuko, his wife, who was 41, was a well-respected teacher in the community. Mikio and Yasuko converted their home into a duplex, and the other half was occupied by Haruko, Yasuko's mother. Now, one thing I want to throw out there before I proceed with the rest of this case. This did happen again in 2000 in Japan. So there are not a lot of sources for this case. I did use a lot of sources from Japan as well as the police department's website with Google Translate. So there is a lot of conflicting information across the sources. And I'm going to note that as I go along, just because I don't want to get it wrong. So I'm going to go with what I could find confirmed through the majority of the sources, but I'm also going to note anything conflicting just to cover all of my bases. So the family converted their home into a duplex so that Haruko, Yusuko's mother, could live next door. I'm about 80% sure that that is her name. There are some sources that say Asahi, so If you do happen to look this up on your own, just know that there are two different names. However, Haruko is the one that I found most consistently. The Miyazawa family loved their neighborhood, but only a few years after they bought their home, the government began to buy up all of the homes in the area. And they did this because they wanted to build a large skate park. This sounds like a really bad plot to another Tony Hawk's Underground game. I'm not really sure what they were thinking here. If somebody bought my home so that they could turn the area into a giant skate park, I'm not really sure what I would think. I don't know if any of you watch 30 Rock. I'm sorry, I'm getting so off the rails, but there's this episode where Steve Buscemi goes undercover into, I think it's a high school, and he's wearing like a fake AC/DC shirt that says music band. If you've never seen 30 Rock, I'm sure you've seen the meme. He's wearing like a backwards red hat with a skateboard over his shoulders, and he's like, "How do you do, fellow kids?" I feel like that would be me if this were to happen to me. But anyway, for some unknown reason, that is what the government began to do, which is really unfortunate. And by 2000, the once bustling neighborhood looked desolate, and there were only a handful of homes left in the area that were still occupied by families. Obviously, while the Miyazawa family loved their home, they did plan on moving in 2001. And on the night of the crime, which again is December 30th of 2000, the Miyazawa family was actually only one of 3 families left in the area. As I said in the beginning of the episode, it was a really happy and tranquil evening for the family as they were getting ready to celebrate the upcoming New Year. But the tranquility of this evening was quickly shattered when an unknown assailant broke into the Miyazawa residence. Under the cover of darkness, the intruder gained access through a second-floor bathroom window, and this window happened to overlook Setagaya Park. Climbing a tree, he removed the window screen and slipped into the house. There is a lot of debate. I know the police were toying with different ideas on how the intruder gained entry, but it does seem like after years had passed, this was how they thought the intruder most likely gained access to the home. So this is what I'm going to go with. Ray, the family's 6-year-old son, had his bedroom on the second floor. So Mikio, who was downstairs in his home office, was roused by a disturbance in Ray's room. He swiftly climbed the stairs to investigate. And when he did, Mikio was met by an intruder that drew a Soshimi Bocho knife. And Mikio was fatally stabbed. I apologize. I should have said this at the beginning of the episode, but just trigger warning for this episode. I mean, an entire family is going to be murdered, so it's just, I'm not going to get into really gory details because I don't like to do that, but I am going to be giving details that pertain to the crime. So just keep that in mind when you're listening. There are 2 children involved and their parents, so this is a little bit of a rough one. And by a little bit, I mean it fucking sucks. So just listen with care. So Mikio was fatally stabbed several times and very brutally, and unfortunately the disturbance that Mikio heard, which caused him to go check on his son, was his son Ray being strangled to death by the assailant. When Mikio was being stabbed by the intruder, it was with such force that the sashimi knife that the intruder brought in broke, and I'm going to elaborate on that in a little bit. So the intruder then had to grab a knife from the family's home. Yasuko and her daughter Nina became ensnared in this nightmare when they encountered the full force of the intruder's wrath. Armed with the Santoku knife that he found within their own home, the assailant attacked Yasuko and Nina, violently stabbing the mother and daughter to death. With absolutely chilling precision, an unknown assailant committed an act of absolutely brutal violence, claiming the lives of all 4 members of the Miyazawa family. Nina, the vibrant and energetic 8-year-old, as well as her younger brother, Ray, who was only 6, met a fate as cruel as it was senseless. Mikio and Yasuko, devoted parents who had nurtured their children with love, found themselves engulfed in a nightmarish end while trying to protect their family. Around 10 a.m. the following morning, Haruko, Yasuko's mother, tried to call her family next door. This was something that, from what I gathered, she did daily. They were a very tight-knit family. But she was ultimately unsuccessful. According to Haruko, it was very rare that they did not answer their phone. So Haruko decided to go next door to check on her family and she was slightly alarmed when she noticed the car in the driveway. Thinking nothing of it, Haruko decided to knock on the door, and there was again no response. Haruko then decided to go back next door to her home, retrieve a spare key to the home next door, and investigate. But as Haruko put the key into the lock, turned it, and opened the door, she quickly discovered that there was something greatly wrong. I am going to post a layout of the family's home so that way you can visualize this before, during, or after you listen to the episode, but it is very easy to see straight across the first floor of the home, all the way from the front door to the stairs to the second floor. So the first thing that Haruko saw when she walked in was her son-in-law Mikio at the bottom of the stairs. Mikio was covered in blood and had several stab wounds throughout his body. Haruko was understandably scared at this point, but she knew that she had to determine if the rest of her family was safe. So Haruko ventured upstairs, hoping to find them alive. But unfortunately, Haruko found her daughter Yasuko and her granddaughter Nina dead in the hallway by the bathroom door at the top of the stairs. Yasuko and Nina were repeatedly stabbed and were covered in wounds from their chest all the way to their faces. Haruko then ran to her grandson Rei's room, where she found him strangled in his bed. Haruko immediately called the police. Immediately, the police initiated a scrupulous investigation led by Takeshi Tsuchida, who was the chief of Seijo Police. Inside the Miyazawa house, beyond the horrific evidence of the murder of an entire family, evidence indicated much more had occurred following these brutal murders. As the police walked through the home and tried to piece together what they were finding, a chilling tale of the intruder's lingering presence was discovered. But thankfully, there was an array of evidence that the killer left behind that offered several glimpses into his identity. In the aftermath of the bloodshed, 2 blood-stained knives were discovered upstairs in the very place where Yasuko and Nina met their tragic end. So the first knife, which was the sashimi knife that the intruder broke in, was broken at the tip, and it was obvious to investigators that it didn't appear to belong to any other knives within the home. The knives that the family had in the home all matched as they were part of sets, so it was obvious that this one knife was an outlier. The knife tip had actually broken in the back of Mikio's head, and once this happened, this is when the killer then went to retrieve a second knife, and this knife matched a set that was present in the household. Additionally, Nina's first and third tooth were found missing, which suggested that she was not only stabbed brutally, but she was beaten as well. Police found bloodstains on the futon, which implied that potentially Yasuko and Nina were attacked while they were sleeping. Now, regarding this whole thing with the futon and Yasuko and Nina, I'm sorry if this is going to get confusing, but this is something that I was never really able to determine one way or another. I think the takeaway here is they were likely attacked while they were sleeping, but one source said that they were attacked when they were sleeping. There was bloodstains on the futon. A couple of other sources, I'm going to jump ahead to something that the police noticed, but a couple of the sources said that they thought that there were bloodstains on the futon because the futon was disheveled and the killer likely slept on the futon. I don't know if there are multiple futons because I also read that there is an attic and there was a mattress of some sort in the attic that had bloodstains and that Yasuko and Nina slept in the attic and that they were likely attacked in their sleep in the attic. So all of these sources will be linked in the show notes, and I apologize that I cannot get a very clear answer for you regarding where they were sleeping and what the situation is. But I think the takeaway is, regardless of the futon, attic, what have you, it does appear across the board that the general consensus is that unfortunately Yasuko and Nina were attacked while they were sleeping. Circling back to the sashimi knife that the killer brought, as well as the knife that he then retrieved from the kitchen in the family home, Both of those knives did have blood on them, but the blood did not match any member of the family. So this indicated to police that the blood had to have belonged to the killer and that it likely happened when the killer injured himself during the attack. Obviously, we all know that when you stab somebody, it's very messy. There's a lot of blood. Now there are 4 people. When there's blood, things get slippery. So it is quite easy for somebody to have the knife slip and nick themselves during an attack like this. So it's not surprising to authorities that the blood didn't match somebody from the family, because with everything going on and the quickness of the attacks and the amount of blood, there was essentially no way that he couldn't have hurt himself somehow. Aside from the murders themselves, what was the most shocking to investigators was what the killer did after the murders. And same. Aside from the brutal murders themselves, when I read about what this guy did after, the audacity of this man is, he is like, what is a level above unhinged? The Miyazawa home was an absolute mess. The second authorities and investigators walked in, they noticed that immediately. Documents were thrown everywhere. There were filing cabinets that were pulled out, almost hanging out of the cabinet itself, ransacked. The couch was messy and appeared as though the killer had slept on the couch following the crimes. Upstairs in the bathroom, there were even more documents, an open first aid kit, and a bloody white towel thrown into the bathtub, which was filled with water. The open first aid kit and the towel make sense because he was probably trying to nurse his wound, but I don't get why you would fill the tub with water and why there would just be documents in the tub. It's just bizarre. But it gets weirder and just worse. So the killer made himself at home and ate food from the refrigerator. This is just so fucking alarming to me on so many different levels. Number one, you just murdered people and you have an appetite. You're probably covered in blood. Number two, you are literally standing feet away from the people that you murdered. Like, what the fuck? So Crazy Pants ate some food from the fridge and then decided that he wanted to unwind, and he made himself some barley tea. The killer then helped himself to several cups of ice cream from the freezer, but instead of using a utensil, this is, besides the murder, this is what unsettles me the most. This is so fucking scary to me. He barbarically pushes, picture you're grabbing a half pint, and instead of grabbing a fucking spoon, you just start to squeeze it out and then just bite it like a fucking animal. This astonishes me. It is truly unhinged. To be able to bite into multiple cups of ice cream, there are not enough Sensodyne tubes in the world for me to ever be able to accomplish this. This is just truly fucking insane. So after this asshole was done playing Martha Stewart Living, he unplugged the family phone and used the family's computer around 1:18 a.m. This is another example of where sources vary. Some sources say that the killer attempted to purchase theater tickets on the family's computer using Mikio's credit card, but for some reason he was not able to. Other sources say that he created bookmarks for pages that involved Mikio and Yasuko's place of employment, but other sources contradicted this and just said that he accessed these bookmarks that were already there. Either way, whatever he did, he's doing really bizarre and cryptic things on their family's computer, it makes no sense. The computer was accessed once more sometime around 10 a.m. the following morning, which was right before Haruko entered the home. Again, sources are contradictory regarding this piece of information as well. There are some sources that say the browsing was abruptly terminated around this time, and this meant that the power cord was removed from the computer's tower. The mouse was also found knocked over the desk, but still attached to the computer. And there are some sources that say that maybe Haruko woke up the computer by knocking the mouse over in a panic, and that maybe the computer activity at 10 was not the killer, but Haruko moving the computer by waking the mouse But I'm more inclined to believe that the killer accessed the computer around that time, and when he heard Haruko maybe knocking on the door, he unplugged the power from the tower and then maybe knocked over the mouse in the process. The reason why I say this, and again, I'm going to attach the floor plan to the social media posts, when I was looking at the way that the bottom floor was organized, the floor is one long room that leads straight to the stairs going to the second floor, and the entrance is at the opposite end. The computer desk, if you are coming in through the door and facing the stairs, is against the right side of the wall. And again, the stairs are where Mikio was found. And it seems like Haruko was probably almost immediately, if not the second that she opened the door, able to see him. And the desk is kind of not exactly in that path. So I'm not sure that she would bump the computer against the wall as she moved towards Mikio. I wasn't there, so obviously I don't know, but those are the two conflicting beliefs regarding the computer being accessed around that time. The amount of physical evidence that the killer left behind is astounding, to say the least. Police were able to obtain several fingerprints from the killer, particularly from those ice cream cups that he ate like a psychopath and then discarded onto the floor. Additionally, his fingerprints were found throughout the home, and these were mainly bloody fingerprints. Police were able to identify bloody prints that were, again, completely separate from the family, and this isn't surprising, again, based on what I had mentioned earlier. The killer also left behind several bloody shoe prints, and he changed out of his bloody clothing in the home and put on Mikio's clothing, and then he left his bloody clothing that he wore there behind. According to Tokyo police, the following was left behind that belonged to the killer: a gray crusher hat, a green, red, black, and orange plaid scarf, black Edwin gloves, which were not used as his fingerprints were all over the place, an AirTech jacket, a light gray and purple long sleeve shirt. And while it's described as a long sleeve shirt, to me, it almost looks like a kind of baseball shirt. It has the white center and then the arms are a different color. I will attach a photo on social media so you can get a better picture of what I'm saying, but this is a significant piece of evidence in the case. That shirt was extremely rare. There were only 130 of them produced and sold worldwide. Additional articles of clothing that belonged to the killer include Slazenger sneakers, size 11, and these sneakers were manufactured in South Korea, and that size was actually never sold in Japan. A gray and black fanny pack, which had traces of sand inside of it, 2 black handkerchiefs, which one of them they thought were potentially used as a wrap for around the handle of the knife, as it had a 3-centimeter cut in the center, and Dracar Noir cologne was identified on the handkerchiefs. The killer also left something else behind, as he took a shit in the bathroom and didn't flush. The audacity of this man. It's giving me PTSD back to the Amanda Knox case. It's just such a bizarre and rude thing to do. Anyway, this was something that actually stood out to investigators, as it was a demonstration of the killer's brazen disregard for not only the sanctity of human life, but the boundaries of basic human decency. The bloody towel and first aid kit that was left in the bathtub of the bathroom, they also believed belonged to the killer. And in addition to the fact that they knew that he had harmed himself on one of the knives because his blood was on both of the knives, he didn't make any attempt to clean up anything in the home. So it would only make sense that this bloody towel was used to nurse a wound that he had. Investigators sent off all of this for analysis, and once analysis returned, it indicated that the intruder's DNA, fingerprints, shoe prints, and clothing yielded very specific details of who the killer is. Yet the pieces of the puzzle still remained agonizingly out of reach. The distinct shirt that was left behind, the remnants of his shit, which suggested a diet of string beans and sesame seeds, and the odd trace of sand in the fanny pack, as well as those shoes that were never sold in Japan, all pointed to not a single person. There were no clear leads, no clear motive, nothing. However, this is very odd, and as of what we know publicly, there is no explanation as to how this particular sand would end up in that fanny pack, but investigators were able to trace the sand to the United States, specifically to the outskirts of Edwards Air Force Base in Nevada. DNA analysis of the evidence left behind provided authorities with a profile of the potential perpetrator. The killer was estimated to be around 170 centimeters tall, 5'6", of thin build, and likely right-handed. Police were able to determine that the suspect was thin because of the fanny pack. The strap of the fanny pack was pulled very, very tightly, which indicated that the suspect's waist was under 30 inches. I want to know how this dude is face-fucking several pints of ice cream and has a waist that is barely 30 inches. I breathe around ice cream and I gain about 50 pounds that I can't lose for a fortnight. The evidence also hinted at a complex genetic lineage, which suggested maternal DNA that matched for European descent and paternal DNA of East Asian origin. There was a sequence within his genes that were only found in 1 of every 5 Korean men, 1 of every 10 Chinese men, and 1 out of every 13 Japanese men. So it was highly likely that the man was of Korean descent, but this does not mean that he couldn't also be Chinese or Japanese. One of the common themes that I noticed in this case, or at least what I could gather from these sources, is that authorities wholeheartedly believed from the get-go that the suspect was Korean. It was completely out of the realm of possibility that this suspect was Japanese. It did seem to indicate across the board that investigators did pretty much focus on the assumption that the suspect was Korean. Now, I don't know if that hindered the investigation at all, if that caused them to not look into people outside of that demographic. I'm not sure, but I do know that that was what they believed. Another interesting piece of evidence was the clothing left behind that belonged to the killer was washed in hard water, which is not seen in Japan. Analysis of the minerals within the clothing led authorities again back to Korea. And like I just mentioned, even though the gene sequence suggested that there was a chance the perpetrator was Japanese, authorities clung to the idea that the perpetrator was a foreigner. Investigators believed the perpetrator was between 15 to 35 years old. They were able to determine that he had type A blood, and while I argue that they weren't able to determine that the killer was a foreigner, this is what they deemed to be a determination to them. As the investigation continued, police were able to put together a timeline of the family's events on the day of their murder. Around 6 p.m. that evening, they went to a local shopping center, which was corroborated by a witness that saw the entire family together there. The family arrived home just around 7 o'clock that evening, and Yasuko called her mother Haruko. Nina went next door to watch something on television with her grandmother Haruko until just after 9:30 p.m. A witness walking by the home said that they heard what sounded like a tense verbal discussion between who was likely Mikio and Yasuka just after 10 p.m. The witness said that it didn't sound troublesome or violent. It just sounded like a basic disagreement between a husband and a wife, nothing to be alarmed or concerned with. Mikio accessed his email around 10:40 p.m., and the rest of the events are unknown until the murder. Police were able to determine that the murders likely occurred around 11:30 p.m., as a neighbor stated that they heard a very loud noise at this time. Unfortunately, even though investigators were able to piece together a timeline, compile a large amount of evidence, there was still an unrelenting question that halted the investigation and still haunts past and current investigators to this day. And that question is the fundamental why. Each act perpetrated by the assailant defied any rationality. Was it driven by greed, a vendetta against the Miyazawa family, or an inexplicable motivation that only the killer would ever know? The lack of insight into the perpetrator's true motives hindered investigative efforts. Lacking the why, the focus of investigators oscillated between potential leads and speculative theories, but both of which only offered uncertainty and dead ends. One avenue of investigation looked at whether Mikio had gotten into an argument with skaters at the park nearby prior to the murder. Could the assailant be a pissed-off skater punk, propelled by hormones and resentment, possibly sprayed down with a lot of Axe body spray, who was seeking vengeance for noise complaints? Sounds insane to me, probably to you, but I respect the fact that investigators pursued that theory because they didn't want to leave any opportunity uninvestigated. Unfortunately, this very bizarre lead ended up leading to nowhere. Another bizarre event that police explored was the fact that animals were found throughout the area that had appeared to have been tortured. There were mainly reports of this happening to rodents that were found still alive. They were discovered in that general area and were missing their tails and appeared as if they had been intentionally mutilated but left alive, which is gross and fucked up. That lead also led nowhere. There was a significance that had clung to the sweatshirt that was left behind, or the baseball shirt rather. Its rarity was very striking because it had been produced and sold only 130 times, yet the police had managed to trace down a dozen owners at best, leaving over 100 other potential suspects roaming free. Now, I don't know why they weren't able to find the other suspects, or if it was just they could have, but they stopped after they interviewed a few people. I don't know, but that seemed to have been likely the best avenue that police could have investigated further. Regardless, the efforts of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department were relentless, with over 246,044 investigators involved and over 12,545 pieces of evidence collected. In Japan, violent home invasions are incredibly rare, so authorities remained determined to solve the case. As the statute of limitations for murder and other crimes were abolished by the 2010 revision to the Code of Criminal Procedure, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department is continuing the investigation, maintaining a dedicated task force. The Miyazawa home stood as a silent witness to the unfolding investigation until, in 2019, it was announced that the aging structure would be torn down due to its deteriorating condition. However, it was rumored that this decision was reversed, and in January of 2020, Yasuko's older sister Anne opened the home to journalists from the Asahi Shimbun company, and a video tour was recorded. Regardless of whether the home will remain open or not, the legacy of what happened in the home endures. Annual memorial ceremonies continue to honor the family, and the story of the Miyazawa family, their unsolved murders, and the tireless quest by authorities for their justice are forever etched into the history of Setagaya. If anyone has any information about the case, call the investigative headquarters of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department. There is currently a reward of 20 million yen, which is roughly equal to $192,288 US, the largest in Japanese history, for credible information leading to the arrest of a suspect. Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard today, please like, review, subscribe on Spotify and Apple. It helps me a lot. You can find me across all social media at fthatpod, except for Instagram, fthat_pod, YouTube, fthatpod, Patreon for archived episodes, exclusive content, a Discord community, some merch and stuff, patreon.com @fthatpod.